There we go.
It's now 6 o'clock in Central European time where I am, and where I think also Stefania is. Matt is in Rochester, New York, so it's a little bit earlier in the day. But welcome to you both. My co-coordinator Martin is also here. Matt, you can go ahead and begin.
Thank you. Do you want us to wait until the very end for any questions, or how should we do that?
I think we can have questions following your paper, and then if there's general discussion at the end, we'll have plenty of time. But since we have enough time, we can take questions right away.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for having me and really my research group. This is a joint effort. And I think this is my third or fourth time presenting for the society. And I actually was on one of the initial, I think it was the first time we presented in Mexico City in 2014 when we met there. And so I've had a lot of experience with, which I'll talk a little bit about, both of us researchers in Latin America, and also with labor markets, a very interesting mix of who we are. So the title of our paper is Coffee Capitalism and Social Justice. And it was completed, this study, by three of us, Lisa Kale-Piasecki, my research assistant and colleague and friend, myself, and Joe Laumer, who was one of the Tiffin University students who took part of this experience. And I'll talk a little bit about that experience as well. So, oops. There we go. So who we are and what happened. We put together an experience, a firsthand experience, travel and study experience to South America. It was the very first experience like this to this region for our university. Up until that point, it had been limited to Europe. I think there was one to Far East Asia, but it was kind of at the right time and right place. And who we are, myself, I have had some experience, which I'll talk about here in the next slide, working with populations in Central America, especially Mexico, and also in the northern region, the Basque Country of Spain, in emerging societies coming out of trauma or coming out of conflict. And I have often written through the lens of social justice. Lisa, my Dr. Piasecki, has also had an experience in Central America teaching in Costa Rica. And so we put together a trip, and we wanted to somehow work on having students learn about social justice, learn about equitable labor markets, and then go to one of these countries to study firsthand in situ and reflect on that and see what kind of attitudes had changed or not changed. And so myself, very quickly, I've worked on historical trauma transmission and have presented that for quite a while and continue to write on that. And right now we're actually in a book process writing about cross-cultural relations between Latin America and the United States, and using some of these data. I'm focusing, and I focus on liberation psychology and social justice on campus, and also immersive experiences. Dr. Piasecki is a business professor. And so our labor markets presentation comes together. What we wanted to do, because Lisa very much researches and publishes on Industry 4.0, on post-work societies, on the idea of equity, and on the idea of social justice within commodities, within especially coffee, because of her experience in Central America. So we had this kind of perfect storm. And in 2018, we were granted the opportunity to take a group of students to Ecuador. And instead of, all of these data would have been presented in much more obviously right on the tip of the experience, if not for the pandemic. So really just the year before the pandemic, we got back, made the class, and we published these data in a reviewed article. But it got stalled, obviously, the presentation portion of these data, because of the pandemic. But we got to South America and we studied together. And what we did was create a class to see if in-country experiences, studying and talking to people and doing, I'm not going to say ethnography, but doing some limited stays with people on the ground at the coffee, not only wholesalers, but retails, but also some of the growing of, and see if Ecuador, being a coffee producing country, if that would change views about coffee. And so we're going to look at, in this presentation, how the students saw coffee before and after the experience of being there. And we situated it with by having students take a class and read 2 textbooks dealing with Latin America before we went. I'll talk about those books here in a second. Why Ecuador? Well, it was available as a trip, but it was a very interesting thing because Ecuador, as many we know, has been a laboratory of economic disparity. While at times through its history being one of the greatest coffee producers, it is also incredibly susceptible to natural disasters. As you can see on the picture, that's a picture of us on the trip, but we're standing on a very curious hill. You can see the erosion, and that is directly as a result of the rainfall and washing away of arable lands. And also Ecuador, like many countries that have hot commodities, that have very tradable things, has been given to political influences that have both exploited people and put ahead a very small class of people over the general population. And so we went. We asked students to do a couple of things. First of all, reflect on their views of coffee, of the production of coffee, something many of us take really for granted, as if there's not a labor market behind it, and whether or not this labor market is just or not. And we also asked them to think about human rights and labor practices. And so our objective was to critique coffee production through social justice. So to do this, we had pre-trip papers based on 2 things. The first one is the Ecuador Reader, which is a very kind of mainstream reader. One of the editors being from the Northern Hemisphere, the other not, from the Southern Hemisphere, but a very typical reader that would introduce students to things like coffee production, areas of production, chocolate production, which of course cacao is another area to study. The other book that we had our students read was Galeano's Open Veins of Latin America, which many of us are very aware of, certainly. And obviously Galeano's text is not mainstream. It has become of sorts, but the the subheading of that book is 5 Centuries of the Pillage of a Continent. And so we had students read that text as a challenger before going to see if they got anything out of that that they could take a look at when looking at coffee. And then we asked the 6 students enrolled in the class to speak about their experiences with coffee production before any experience happened. And it was a very interesting study that students not only had never really thought about this, one of the most traded commodities on the planet, they often didn't think that there was a labor behind it. And these are North American students, US students, all of them were US students. And Tiffin University is in the Midwest, and the surrounding agriculture of the Midwest, if anybody is in the Midwest teaching, we know that we see tractors, we see combines, we see trucks, and we see very few people on the ground conducting US agriculture. We know that's not actually true, but that's the vision. And a lot of students had that vision for coffee production. So some of the quotes that were interesting, they were surprised that 500,000 people depend on this in Ecuador for their livelihood. They didn't know that in some places coffee is seen as a luxury, that we don't see it that way. But we had one student who actually had a family member, and this often happens, who was that outrider. And this student said that, in fact, that he was a coffee roaster and distributor in the US and was very familiar that in the 70s, and this family member's history had seen Ecuador being one of the biggest exporters. And today, that has dropped significantly. There's climate reasons, and there's also stemming out of climate reasons, there are agricultural and horticultural reasons. There's a decline in coffee production and also chocolate production. And lastly, they were interested in this idea of the plantation, a word they had not used in modern English in the North, a word in the United States that is relegated to has a hugely culturally loaded, historically loaded, but in the South, we visited several plantations, coffee and chocolate, and this bothered them, just the name alone. So very interestingly, and just to keep an eye on time, it looks like we have about 5 minutes in this session left. So let's look at some of the outcomes. So we did the experience. We had students keep the journals and pictures. They were to present a photojournalistic exposition along with this pre-trip, post-trip paper analysis, reading the books, and they got 3 credit hours, and it was a culture, or I think it was CUL undergraduate, 200 level credit. And then we presented together once we were back in the United States. And so this is very qualitative. And we just came up with some themes about what the students saw. So in conclusion, what did we see? The post-trip papers were striking to us. And I do qualitative work, and I teach a qualitative lab in New York. And so I do a lot of the theming and coding, but for this class, we really ran it as a conversation. We came together and we read some of the most salient quotes from the papers, and almost all of them used words, obviously one of them shows up here, as strong, wake-up call, dramatic. These were highlighted over and over, that people were very, very surprised at how exploitive coffee production, even in a country that is now in decline in coffee production, treats its workers. Some students said that they dislike coffee, and later on, this person said, "Now I know why. It's not the coffee producer's fault, and it's not coffee's fault. We have, in some cases, made coffee into a very unfair labor market." I think our last quote is going to show why. The students were very concerned about the small producers. And just like in the United States in the 1980s, when the small family farms started, they were in decline, of course, but started their very dramatic and public decline. This has been happening in Ecuador, and we saw many, many plantations and coffee reserves and chocolate reserves that were in decline and laying in abandon. And this was very bothersome because these students were staying in cities and were seeing the poverty and talking to people, and people were saying, you know, we used to have a much more robust production, but markets have changed, and a lot of coffee is now produced, of course, in Brazil, but in Africa and Southeast Asia, where the cost of labor is significantly less. Another strong theme was not having any insight into coffee. And that was very curious to us, something that we, again, take for granted and use almost daily. But I think this last one, and again, the idea of an equitable labor market, the idea that cheaper and the cheaper beans that are being grown today for instant coffee over the more expensive boutique or the native, which is being produced out of Africa, the students felt that was capitalism, but also at the expense of people who used to work every day, would go to these sites and work. And curiously, the students who really caught on that coffee is very important in the world, it's very treasured, and therefore a lot of the students that this is a sentiment of discovered that it has a sway over us. And we will do a lot for our treasured commodities. And some of the most traded on the planet are, of course, oil, chocolate, gold, coffee. And they were upset. The students were concerned about the labor market that is left is incredibly, incredibly sexist. We encountered many women who were working in the field, who were working in the shops, who were working in harvesting this commodity. But we met nobody who was actually signing the checks or maybe in control of the system, in Ecuador at least, that were women. And every time we went to a plantation, we were given tours by men and women. But then when the business was discussed at the plantation, it was always a man. And this really stuck with the students. It was very curious. It was kind of that black swan moment that Galeano talks a little bit about it, but his text is a critique. This is arguable, but his text also can be pretty heteronormative, but they picked up on this. And it was, for us, and why we got published, I think, is because it does call into question not only who's working in the market, the labor force, but why, and is it better for us to have, excuse me, inexpensive coffee at the expense of Ecuadorians deciding to grow instant coffee beans very cheaply and have their cost of, or the quality of life, decrease? And this brought up a lot in students. It really did. So there we are again. We met with, this is us with Sewell High School. We made lasting relationships, and people really asked us, to do something with these data. And we felt that that was also our mission, to expose and get these out there. I'm so grateful that I know it's taken several years under the pandemic to be able to present these data in a very limited way, but they are out there. And I feel we have to do something with them. The other thing, this is not a scientific note, but just to conclude with, they did over several times on the ground in Ecuador, they told us that there is a possibility that coffee production in the Americas could very much slow down or disappear because of climate change, especially in the northern part of South America to Mexico, as things change. And that was very frightening to a lot of people when all of a sudden you hear, this might disappear. Anyway, I will stop there right at 20 minutes and see if we want to have questions, or if we would like to go on with Stefania and roll on, but I will leave that up to you all.
Thank you, Matt.
You bet.
Are there questions immediately? I always have a question, so maybe I ask it.
Sure.
If I were to say, what is the dependent variable that what is it that you want to explain? It's about how education can intervene basically in consciousness anyway, from the consumer point of view, about unfair labor markets. And I think you clearly showed that for this group of people that that happened. What I'm wondering about is where the analysis could go. And, we have a network on global value chains in SASE, and they would probably begin with the ownership structures and the supply chains that are behind this. And it was interesting to me that you said that this is small producers. So I'm wondering about the ownership structure, and also if they would be embedded in what the global value chains people would call buyer-driven value chains, that there's some buyer sitting in the United States, many tiers up, buying these beans and imposing on this whole chain the cheaper. It's not just that instant coffee is cheaper, it's also that they're pushing down their own stockholder value pressures onto smaller and smaller and smaller units of production. I wonder if that's something that you took up, or that the books took up, and how that fits in maybe to this analysis that's very common in SASE on global value chains.
It is, and that's an excellent point. It actually fits in with, I mentioned the book very quickly. So part two, we started to discuss that. The students immediately said, education brought us to this point where we got educated about something, and they started to follow the money. And they said the same thing. They were like, well, wait a minute. Is there something in the US that we are doing, or chains that we are investing in, that are keeping the things the way they are? And so in the book, now we are taking that kind of as a part two. And over the Christmas holidays, we hope to we've been invited to go down to Monterrey Tech University in Mexico, and one of their branches is in San Cristobal, or outside of San Cristobal, and to go to Chiapas to some of the not only local producers, but people who have relationships with those in the north, and how they established those big relationships, and how they educated some communities to demand things like fair trade and free trade and equal exchange is one here in the Northeast. And so we want to study that, but that's an excellent point. If education can work with students who had never really been in that situation, what could it do with communities or these big buyers? And we hope we can figure that out. But like you said, that's a big question in many of these discussions.
I see Martin has a question.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Matt, for presenting this interesting project.
Yeah.
I've got 2 points. The first is, I mean, studying the structures is one thing, but have you discussed what people could do as consumers? And not buying coffee is not a solution, probably. I mean, I'm asking about action following from your analysis, because I think that students felt like we must do something about this. So that's my first question. And the second is, I mean, that's probably a very quantitative question. Do you have a feeling whether the trip and the experience there or the books have made the change, or is it both? Do you know what I mean? So is it the experience plus reading, or is it one of both?
So that's a great question, because we were wondering about that too. And we just about made it mixed methods, because at the end we were thinking, oh, we would really like to know which had a big influence. One of the most, what some people call radical texts on American history, Open Veins of Latin America. Of course, that's a dramatic read. And you're right, that in any future trip, we would need to study. And from our responses, we did feel it was both, because there were certain themes that they only could have gotten from Galeano. And those were things like Galeano's very famous ideas about the Crusader mentality, that the Americas was this place just to rough ride across and take whatever you want forever. And so that was there. The exploitive part of Galeano's text about how Spain exploited the New World was very much there. But we also know that the experience was there, because as this picture shows, people had very human reactions to the people they met. They really felt very, well, when we met some of the Ecuadorians, they said, we met one of our new friends, and they said, well, pues sí, yo soy americano. Yes, I'm an American. And the students said, what? He just referred to himself as an American. And I said, well, he is an American. That he's lives here in South America, and they're taught in their schools that there's only one American continent. And so that only came from experience. And that was, to me, very beautiful. So I think they're both, but it's a great point. Mixed methods, maybe, to try to tease that out in the future.
And the first question was about action, what consumers can do.
Yes, very quickly, the action, all of the responses that we came up with, even in the producers in Ecuador, all of the action was centered around climate change. Reducing carbon emission, reducing the length of how far away your commodity is to the person consuming it, which is hard with coffee and chocolate, but it was all around climate change. Many, almost overwhelmingly, people saw climate change as existential to coffee and chocolate, but agriculture. It was coffee and chocolate rusting and rotting on the trees and the bushes.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm so grateful we could get this out there, and I look forward to hearing from Stefania too.
Thank you.
I will stop sharing. All right, there we go.
Well, thank you so much. I try again with my presentation. I'm Stefania Capogna, and thank you. My strong accent, you cannot have doubt where I'm from. I'm from Italy, from Rome. I'm an associate professor at the Link Campus University in Rome, and I'm scientific director of the challenge project that means digital challenge in higher education. And today my presentation will focus on one of the activities that we realized through this co-funded Erasmus project. And I'll try to focus on briefly on 3 points related to explain who we are, what we do, and then I'm focusing on directly on the main results of the ReEduco project, that means rethinking education competencies, expertise, best practices, and teaching in digital era. And the challenge, who we are, the challenge project, the challenge in higher education is a co-funded project by Erasmus funding, which focus on 2 main goals. The first one is the creation of an international hub, network researcher, focusing on network researcher interested in the cooperation and sharing knowledge and researchers focused on the digital transformation, digital impact and effects that digital transformation produce on higher education in a multidisciplinary and holistic perspective, systemic perspective. And the second one closely related to the goal to create a network researchers around these topics is the creation of a permanent observatory to share results, research, and knowledge and projects in order to this focus. In this presentation today, I'll focus on the one of our project, hour of research interesting to understand the challenge that digital transformation produce for higher education. So the main results of this project, rethinking education competencies, expertise, best practice, and teaching, this is a project focused on the analysis, on the realization of a desk analysis based on secondary data in a comparative perspective to analyze the mismatch between education and market labor in particularly in order to the digital innovation, digital market, digital profile competencies that create in Europe, because the comparison focused on European countries. So to analyze the mismatch that these the digital innovation produce in the market level. And in fact, we know that digital transformation in Europe, not only in Europe, obviously, will rapidly accelerate. And these innovations will deeply impact lifestyles and socioeconomic systems on learning processes. And we know that there are several opportunities that emerge through digital innovation, but we know also, thanks to our research, thanks to public scientific literature related to this topic, that there is a great risk related to a poorly prepared society to face the future. In fact, we assist, we verify an important mismatch in order to digital profiles, digital trends, digital market, digital skills that characterize our countries. We estimated that 90%, it's estimated that 90% of future jobs will require digital skills. And the scientific literature denotes that 44% of Europeans do not even manage basic skills. And this is obviously the starting point of our reflection and our need analysis. And the main objectives of the project was to realize a need analysis applying a qualitative methodology to interpret the data collected by national reports elaborated by each national partner involved in the project. We involved Italy, Spain, Greece, Finland, and Cyprus. And the main object of these activities, this need analysis, was to elaborate an analysis, a recognition based on cultural perspective through which national country partner elaborated their national report in order to follow this comparative research. We had the research point of our desk analysis was the analysis of the mismatch of disruptive innovation determined by digital innovation, focusing on the new profiles, new skills, and new trends of labor markets pulled by the industry 4.0 and the scenario of the society 5.0 through the national perspectives, because we consider that in the elaboration of the national report, the partner narration, the partner writing, elaboration of the report allow us to analyze the cultural perspective through which national countries approach digital innovation, approach the creation of new educational context, new educational path, new educational opportunities to face this challenge. And obviously the cultural and methodological perspective was based on a socio-constructivist perspective through which we analyzing the communication, the words, the communicative style and elaboration of the national report, we can analyze the differences in the interpretation of this mismatch and and the digital revolution. So the rationale through which we realized these activities was based on three main dimensions. The idea that it's possible to analyze the cultural dimension, that is the method through which we can fabric the meaning that generates and inform social actions and interpretive framework of social actors, and the possibility to understand symbols through which countries elaborated their report. So we detect the cultural categories, setting a communication by means of the emotional text mining, that is a specific methodological approach that we can use through qualitative methodology to analyze different kind of text. And in this case, we analyzed the report through which we prepared this desk analysis at in these 5 country partners involved in the project. So to operate this comparative text analysis, we operated as follows. First one, we created a common and detailed research design to define the European perspective, competencies profiles, updated perspective, and impact for future and society. We define the structure of a detailed structure of the desk analysis to elaborate, to collect, analyze the data, and to collect to elaborate the report. And then at the end, we create also a glossary to define common meanings and common sources to select data of secondary nature, institutional data to elaborate this analysis. And at the end, we adopted the emotional text mining to elaborate a comparative analysis among these 5 reports elaborated by all the research team, the international research team. And so we elaborated the project national reports based on the same structures and same design. And related to the analysis, we can say that we collected all the reports in a corpus and calculated the lexical index. And the emotional text mining is based on a socio-constructivist approach that identifies cultural symbolic categories and the representation of setting in communication. And so this methodology employs a natural language processing approach on unstructured data based on context-sensitive bottom-up logic that it doesn't previously classified. But we, through the analysis, through the TLab software to process this analysis, we identify semiotic and semantic level of communication. We identify different domains, including document comparison, and we organized the text in subdivided chunks of text to analyze, to understand the meaning of this corpus of analysis. And then we obtain a very interesting results, because through the correspondence analysis, we identified three main factors that we titled Matching Demand Supply, Training Models, Digital Development, and National Digital Innovation Trends. Considering that the first one, the first factor, the matching demand supply, covered more than 45% of the inertia of all the analysis, and the total of the three factors explain the 76% of the inertia. And so this analysis help us to understand the main categories, the semantic categories, to interpret the mismatch between education and market labor. And the figure that we can observe through the factorial space help us to identify that in this interpretation we can distinguish four main topics that are on different pole in the factorial space. This is very interesting, because the main topic are market trends, national plan, school work transition, and digital development level. And this topic, the positioning in the factorial space, outlines the difficulty in matching education and the job market, considering that this topic remain in the two opposite poles of the factorial space, representing the distance in the reconstructing and considering the link, the collaboration, the integrated perspective of education space, consider a macro system which include in education, structure, university, and market labor. And we can the second cluster allocation in the factorial space set by the second and third factors help us to understand better this distribution on the semantic space, because it's interesting to observe that the four clusters representing the main topic that we named are located on each pole of the second and third factors, setting a two-dimensional space. And what is interesting that this representation happens when there are culturally and distinctive representation that are unrelated, and that they cannot be that can in opposite situation, in dichotomic situation. And it's very interesting that because these transversal results characterize all national reports, also considering the local differences, the national differences in law tradition, in normative tradition, in institutional tradition, in way to organize transition between school and market labor, and dual system, professional system, and so on. So it's a very transversal results that we can observe through our research. And the cultural symbolic space that we can summarize in this table can help to identify the lack of representation connecting these two dimensions, because we have we can observe that there are some empty shells, for example, that represent the dichotomic semantic representation of these factors. So we can observe that in order to the market trend that we have in the opposite pole the issue related to the job market and the issue related to the development trend. When we observe the, we move our attention to the educational space, we can consider only the macro dimension related to the law, financing, normative strategies, and the micro organization related to schools, institutions, teachers, and students and families, and how these activities are organized. And while the fourth main topic related to the level of digital development is divided in two subtopics, also in this case in two opposite sides of the symbolic space, that are that refers to performance set. In the first dimension related to the performance that we attend, and the second one related to the standards that must be achieved to focus on that performance. And moving quickly to the main results of the comparative perspective, is very interesting to observe the results of the comparison, because as we say, the reality, the context of the 5 countries involved in the project, in the research, are very different in their reality, in their tradition, in their institutional history. But and so also the narration of the results of the national reports focused on different elements, on different priority, on different issues. And then we can observe through this through the comparative perspective, for example, that the each country partner organization shows different narrative perspectives and priorities in analyzing digital transition, elaborating their national reports. And for example, the market trend, the issue related to the market trend is particularly relevant in the Italian report, where the theme of the mismatch is strongly felt, but it's also absent. It's totally absent in the Finnish and Greek reports, for example. While the digital development level is relevant in the Italian and Greek reports, and whereas it was always been in the last places in the European comparison, for example, related to the digital European social index, that we know that Greek and Italy are in the last part of the comparison. Considering the national plan, for example, is very important in Spanish report, and this probably also due to the fact that in the project, the partner was a business accelerator and incubator related to the ecosystem of Valencia, so very oriented to the very close to the national strategies for innovation of the ecosystem. A very interesting point is the school work transition, particularly relevant for the Cypriot and Finnish report, where the dual model, the professional education system, is very strongly integrated with the social system, and contrary, for example, totally contrary to the Italian experience, where the education is strongly separated by the professional and system. So moving to a conclusion and a reflection, considering our time, the analysis through the cultural symbolic space that we assume at the beginning of the project as a lens through which to analyze the mismatch and the strategy to elaborate an answer to this mismatch by the country policies, digital policies for the market education and market labor. The cultural symbolic space outlines the relationship between education and the job market, summarizing the symbolic cultural categories of sense making and the collective representation, and the main elements that we can consider through the analysis is this strong disconnection between the policy level and the practice one, and the strong disconnection between the semantic representation of education system and market labor and request of digital competencies and digital profiles. The emotional text mining results suggest that there is a fracture at the level of policies that spills over into practices, and suggest also that the mismatch between educational system and market labor is first of all a cultural issue rather than professional and technological issue. So the first goal, the first object, the first challenge for policy makers, policy decision makers, and higher education is to invest on cultural level, to create a new connection between systems, to recreate, to rethink the education system as an integrated macro system where education, instruction, schools, market labor, and innovation can cooperate. And it's interesting, and I outlined this element, that it's interesting to observe that this strong radical separation through both dimensions is transversal to all the national record. And so to conclude, we return to our initial objective, the idea to launch, to work for the creation of international research network and observatory to observe in the building of cooperation to analyze digital transformation and innovation in learning, teaching, practices, research, governance, and organization system to orient, to address policy makers, policy decision makers, and education institutions to face the digital challenge, because digital challenge is cultural before then technological in our conclusion. And thank you for your attention, and sorry for my bad English. I'm at your disposal.
Thank you very much, Stefania, we can go now to questions. Yes, Martin.
Yes, Stefania, thanks for the interesting presentation. So I'm interested in comparative cross-country research, and I'm also interested in digital competency. But I've got two questions. I mean, I'm not familiar with the type of analysis you do, text mining, emotional text mining. Very interesting. I'm wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about who wrote these texts. I didn't quite get the background, who actually wrote the texts, because in a way you're saying the people who wrote the texts are representatives of their country and of the culture in their country. That's a very strong assumption. And related to that, I'm wondering, why is it that you interpret the differences between the countries in cultural terms? Because I'm an institutionalist, so I could imagine that there are huge differences in terms of labor markets, skill mismatch, the educational system between Finland and Cyprus. So it could be between technology and culture, there's something like institution and labor market organization, right? Those are the two questions.
Yes, I try to thank you for your question. I try to explain our work. We created an international research group to elaborate the national report. For this, we prepared. We had a training preparation activities for the collecting, analyzing data, and writing the report that involved all the network researcher through the 5 different countries. So we involved one organization of education or research center or innovation center in the project. So we identify the group of researchers to cooperate in this international research. We created and sharing a detailed research design to define first of all, the European framework in digital innovation, because we refer only to the to some of the European countries for which the digital European framework is the starting point for all the countries in order to define strategic planning, investment, innovations, and so on. So first of all, we elaborated this common European framework in order to the digital policies and strategies at European level to orient national activities. Then we created the national report based on the some common elements. We worked on documentary analysis to create the national the national strategies and policies and planning that refer to the common European framework. And then we collected data from secondary data or open institutional data set to elaborate the trend of market labor on focusing on digital innovation, so related to the innovation determined by digital transformation, digital industry 4.0, and so on. So trying to identify the new trend, new profile, new skills that for each country partner representing the central point of the national strategy, investment, and so on. And then, in order to we collected all the national report elaborated on the basis of this common vision, tools, methodology, and instruments, and glossary, and we collected all the report in a unique document, corpus of text, to adopt the emotional text mining to analyze all the content, the total of the content realized through the 5 national reports. Considering what? Considering that words, communication, and the choices that also researchers adopted in writing their report are also representation of their cultural perspective, traditions, experiences, background, cultural background, and that it's impossible to verify the. So we tried to test the emotional text mining in the analyzing of these hidden background dimensions that is not possible to verify, to explore through other methodologies. I don't know if I answered to your question.
Yes, thank you. What about the second question? Are there institutional differences hidden there? So how do you discriminate between culture and institutions, right?
We tried, considering that one of the point of the researcher was to valorize the interconnection between different systems. Considering the education as a macro system, which include schools, university, market labor, innovation, digital specialists. Considering this perspective, in the selection of the country partner, in the institutions for each country partner, we selected different experience. The university, research center, vocational training, innovation center for innovation, for digital innovation ecosystem, and training center for digital competencies. So we selected different institutions, profiles, considering the interconnection, the differences in approaching the mismatch and the possibility to create a connection, a virtuous connection, could be a value for the research.
Okay, thank you.
Are there further questions? Maybe I ask a grand question. You began by saying that the purpose of this research was to figure out how to improve students embracing digital education. What's your answer? Is it different for every country, or are there some overarching things that at the European level would be important? Because if I understood your final comparative analysis, it's that country is more important than the European level.
Yes, the situation is different in the 5 country partners involved in the research, because we know that, for example, Finland is in the highest level in the DESI index, for example, compared to Italy or Spain, which are on the last position of the same comparison. Surely we observe a very different awareness in policy institutional strategies in leading digital innovation at different level. And at the same time, we also thanks to another research that we realized in the same period, we also observed at institutional level, at organizational level, in different countries, different competencies in lead the digital challenge, a sort of lack of vision of digital future, digital project for the education system. Surely it's a very big challenge, and we haven't the solution, but I can conclude saying that personally, I don't think that the solution is only exclusively in the technological system, in the technologies, because we have to avoid the risk to escape in the technology, renouncing to define the problems, the question, the vision, the values that must orient the future and the development. So returning to the central point of the research, I think we think, thanks to also to the general results of the research, that the problem is first of all a cultural problem and a leadership problem, an institutional leadership problem to face and to research, to investigate, to understand how to solve.